Okay. This has been quite a monumental 2 weeks. I had my tooth pulled on June the 3rd, and it has been the extraction on a scale of 1 to 10. I would put the suffering on 1, but the healing, the aftermath, I'd put on a scale of 9. It has been rough. Yeah. I do not do well on antibiotics, okay? And the dentist at first was not going to use antibiotics, even though there was like a 10-year infection underneath this tooth. But I thought maybe he was right. I thought maybe with the tooth gone, the bacteria would just kind of spread out and not. Nope. By the 4th day after the extraction, I could tell I needed to be on antibiotics, and my husband, Brent, who's a doctor, said, you need to be on antibiotics. And the Jesuits blocked, see, I don't have a phone because we learned that having a phone meant that Jesuits could use brain control on me. So, and I've been communicating via email with my dentist, and that was blocked. They weren't getting my email, so I had to take the bus out there to get the prescription for the antibiotic and then come back and then walk to get my antibiotic. And I thought, oh, that'll solve my problem. Well, antibiotic therapy went really crazy. The first couple days was okay, but by the time the 5th day came, I felt really awful. What was happening was I started getting a yeast infection as a result of the antibiotic, and it was causing a lot of swelling. In fact, I still am dealing with the yeast infection. I ended up getting thrush in my mouth and getting basically a systemic yeast infection. The dentist wrote a prescription for a 10-day course of antibiotics, okay? That is really rough on somebody who has a history of a systemic yeast infection. Back in like 2010, I've had problems with yeast most of my life, and most of my life it was the Jesuit super yeast, which Jesus claimed I was cured of in, I think it was 2021, as a result of being on Seroquel and some divine intervention as well. And apparently my body has developed an allergy to the Candida yeast toxin, okay? So if I go on antibiotics, okay, and I get a yeast infection, even if for most people it would be more of a minor matter, they could just get on some, like Monostat or whatever to deal with the aftermath, or maybe get some diarrhea at the end of their antibiotic treatment. But for me, with an allergy to yeast toxin, I get a lot of inflammation. So what was happening was I was getting I'm still dealing with a lot of swelling. This side was where the tooth was pulled. And it has been rough. And the last day of treatment, man, I felt like I was doing chemotherapy, just to keep taking those antibiotics. It was just, I almost thought of quitting after the 8th dose. I thought, I can't do this. Yeah, I'm getting so sick with the yeast. Right now I've got a yeast infection. By the time I think I'm coughing because of yeast. I've got thrush in my throat, okay? It's in my throat and in my tongue. I sent an email to my dentist about 5 days ago and said I need to be on a yeast medication. I'm getting thrush in my mouth, and I'm starting to feel itchy down in my vagina. That coughing is yeast, okay? So they put me on Deflucan. But it didn't matter. Just doing a 10-day course of antibiotics has been really, really rough on me. all I can say is, yeah, the yeast infection now has gone systemic. My bowels felt like they were on fire. I was getting heartburny symptoms. My esophagus was having spasms. I would say about the 9th or 10th day on the antibiotics, I was getting esophageal spasms that were so severe, I thought maybe it was my trachea. I thought maybe I was getting asthma. So I was freaking out. I was thinking, oh no, maybe I can't breathe. And I said, no, I can't be allergic to the amoxicillin. This is like the 8th or 9th day. This has to be yeast or something. And finally, the only way I could take the 10th day, and I was getting such bad dizziness too. I mean, really dizzy, almost like vertigo. And I thought I was seeing black spots before my eyes. People do not realize it, but when you get a systemic, and yeah, the infection has gone systemic now. I mean, what I had swelling on this side because of the extraction, but what happened was because of the yeast infection, my tongue started swelling up, my salivary glands got really infected, and then the swelling started going on this side of the mouth. In fact, I think you're seeing a little bit of swelling right here on my face, still left over. So yeah, I was taking the Deflucan and it was helping, and I was getting the diarrhea from the yeast too, and my bowels felt like they were on fire. And I was thinking, what was so funny is right after I had the tooth pulled, okay, I went to the receptionist and said, I was holding the gauze, and I said, oh, that was a piece of cake. Little did I know what would be coming up over the next 10 days. The extraction itself was a piece of cake to me, okay? But dealing with the yeast infection has been hell, man. Oh, God. You would think it would be the other way around, that the extraction would be the worst part. But no, it was the yeast infection that I got from the antibiotic treatment. And of course, the yeast went crazy because I had a bunch of raw flesh and blood to eat on this side. The only reason that I stuck with the 10-day antibiotic treatment is because we were dealing with a 10-year-old infection on this side. This infection has been here since 2013. That's back in 2013, in October 2013, I went to a Florida dentist, okay? Here's what I think happened with that Florida dentist, okay? He put a crown on my tooth about, I think it was about 2011, I believe it was, okay? According to my Alabama dentist, that Florida dentist put the crown on crooked, okay? So what happened is there was a little gap so that everything was going down into the root of that tooth, and that tooth got super infected. So I went to this dentist. What I think happened to that dentist, because I'm puzzled by this, because my men told me that he was a good man, the dentist, and even Jesus said that. So my theory is that when the dentist put the crown on my tooth, he got switched out with his Jesuit clone right before the procedure, and the Jesuit clone deliberately put the crown on crooked, okay? So that there was like a slight gap on the bottom of that crown, letting in all sorts of stuff into the root of that tooth. And so that would have been about 2011, okay, when I had that done. When I showed up at that same dentist's office, it was a Florida dentist, in October 2013, he showed me an x-ray and said, you got a huge cavity in the root of this tooth, and we will need to extract this tooth and give you a dental implant. And at that time, I had just lost my job at Walmart, okay? I was about to lose my dental insurance, and I was freaking out. When I came home, Jesus, spoke to my men and said, he said that dentist showed you a fake x-ray. You only have a mild yeast infection in that tooth, and just leave it alone. And so I thought, he said, I canceled my dental appointment. I didn't go through with the implant or the extraction or all the stuff that he recommended. And I hadn't seen a dentist from 2013 until May 2023. for 10 years. And that tooth kind of went on and off, on and off. And sometimes it would swell up, and then sometimes it would go away. And I just assumed it was a yeast infection. And I remember Jesus telling me there's nothing a dentist can do about a yeast infection in that tooth. Personal opinion, I'm not sure about this, but I think Jesus might have done a little divine intervention on that tooth. Yeah, and when he left us in June 2022, he couldn't interfere anymore, and maybe he wasn't able to do any more divine intervention. And Buddha did tell me in October, I think it was 2022, that I do need to see the dentist. So I made an appointment to see this dentist. He had a 6-month waiting list. According to my man, he's a good dentist, okay? Let me let you know how much suffering I've gone through. One way you can tell is by how much weight you lose. I don't even know if you can tell. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but I've lost about 5 to 8 pounds as a result of what I've been going through the past couple weeks. Yeah, I'm at my dream weight, I can say that much, okay? But man, it has been... Okay, so I started taking the antibiotic on about the 3rd or 4th day after the extraction because it was just so, I could tell there was an infection there. And I thought I'm never going to heal from this extraction until I get that infection under control. So I got on the antibiotic, and I figured within 2 or 3 days the infection would get under control, but within 2 or 3 days it wasn't under control. Everything was getting inflamed. I had a swollen salivary gland, so I went back to the dentist and they cleaned it all out with antiseptic, and about a week after the extraction. And then I came home, and the next day it was like, oh, I'm so dizzy. What was happening was, as a result of the antibiotic therapy, I was getting a yeast infection, okay? So I was dealing with a bacterial infection, plus a yeast infection was setting in, so there was a lot of swelling in here. Oh, and then I started getting the symptoms of a systemic yeast infection, feeling, I don't know how much you guys know about systemic yeast infections, but your abs feel like they're on fire. You get a diarrhea. You get thrush in your mouth. You get a vaginal itching. You get a thrush sore throat. And not only that, I was getting heartburn symptoms, even feeling nauseated because of it. And I was thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I can take the 10-day course, but this bacterial infection in that area is so stubborn, I have to do it. It was like, I would say the past 3 days on antibiotic, I even joked with my man, I said, this must be what chemotherapy must feel like to some people. You might say, well, it couldn't have been that. I don't think you guys realize how nasty a yeast infection, when it goes systemic, can get. You really feel like, I was so dizzy, I couldn't concentrate. I felt like I had fog brain, okay? The yeast infection. I know back in 2009, I could not do more than 2 days of antibiotics. That's when my yeast was really, really bad. I had the Jesuit super yeast. By the time, if any doctor put me on antibiotics, by the 2nd day, I had to drop it. It's like, I can't take this. I'm feeling sicker than I was with the germ that I needed the antibiotic for. But in this case, I knew I had to stick with the 10-day treatment. Fortunately, I had some days that weren't so bad, but by the 10th day, it was like, oh my God. And then I was making things worse to try to, stand the antibiotics. I was drinking extra kefir because that's like probiotics, right? That was a mistake. The milk sugar in the kefir was actually feeding the germs, okay? And probably slowing down the healing process. And the Gail Shield got a significant drop when I did that. Yeah, so it's possible I might have worsened both the yeast and the bacterial infection and kind of slowed down the healing process because I was drinking extra kefir. I thought it was helping out my situation and making it worse. The good news is my last day of antibiotics was 2 days ago. I am now on Deflucan. The dentist put me on Deflucan. and I'm feeling better. I mean, I'm still feeling kind of dizzy, but I'm feeling better. And and all of this was happening while my husband was saving the universe, right? You might say it must have been this. I actually was pretty good. I took that really well. I was very calm about it. I believed what Buddha told me. But on June the 3rd, when I had my dental appointment, I wanted to get that tooth pulled because my husband told me, he is a doctor, he said you do need to get that tooth extracted because you've got a bacterial infection in that tooth, which has gone far enough now that if you don't get that tooth pulled, you're in danger of getting sepsis. One of your organs could get infected, and he said it could become life-threatening. You could die. So I thought, oh, okay, so I decided to do it. I said, might as well just get this over with. So I'm now on the better end of it, but it was rough. Like I said, this tooth has been acting up since 2013, so I guess it's to be expected that once that tooth gets pulled, that long infection in there, this whole area right around this tooth has been swollen for 2 years at least. I mean, it hasn't gone down. It's just the infection was so entrenched, so the tooth just had to be pulled. The good news is it's now out, and I'm finally out of the woods, I think. Yeah, so I wanted to make a video. You might say, I'm going to be writing, at first I thought I was going to write a story about Lizzo and how we defeated her, and I am going to be writing that story, but my next Gail series story is going to be about why Jesus got me started on the Gail commandments. And I'll give you a little bit of my history on why I so easily become obsessed with my diet. And, it's because I've got a history of having a systemic yeast infection. And unfortunately for people like me, when we get a systemic yeast infection, a lot of the traditional medical community is not well versed on how to deal with this, and and when you get some of the symptoms of it, a lot of people treat you like you're a little crazy, because you get some really weird symptoms. I mean, like with this one, I was getting esophageal spasms. I felt like I had fog brain. Okay, a thrush. Thrush is what you would expect with yeast, okay? But what you don't expect is the diarrhea, the heartburn, the nausea, the dizziness, the feeling of just being like you feel like you're really, really sick, and you feel so tired. You have no energy. It's almost like you feel like you got mono or something, and you just don't expect that from a yeast infection, right? Yeah, and that's how I felt. And but apparently, when a yeast infection gets systemic, okay, you can start getting symptoms like that. Yeah. You say, you should have got off the antibiotic. I couldn't. 10-year infection. See, my attitude was, I said, if you don't lick this germ that's infecting down here, and you don't endure this 10-day course of antibiotics, you might end up having to get back on antibiotics again when it relapses. So I was determined to stick it through, but believe me, by the 10th day, oh my God, it was just sheer willpower. I felt like a soldier on the front lines of the battlefield, sticking with that antibiotic therapy. I felt like how a cancer patient must feel when they're going through chemotherapy. It's like, I got to do this or else it'll never be over. I'll have to get back on antibiotics again. I'm telling you, I am not exaggerating when I say on a scale of 1 to 10, I would put the suffering I went through during the extraction procedure at a 1, And the suffering I went through as a result of antibiotic therapy, on a 9. And I'm not exaggerating, okay? I was in labor for 26 hours when I delivered my baby, okay? He was in posterior position and he had to turn. The suffering I went through as a result of getting the yeast infection, which went systemic, because of the antibiotics I had to be put on for 10 days of torture, was almost like the first 13 hours of labor when I was delivering my child. That's how bad it was. The last day, when I was laying in bed, the esophageal spasms in my neck were so severe, it felt like, ooh. I felt like my trachea was going, grrr, like I was thinking, do I need to call the ambulance? Am I going to be able to breathe? My heart, let me tell you, my heart, I felt pressure on my heart. It was like, grrr. What was happening was my gallbladder. I kind of went through something like this in 2009. My gallbladder, and I felt pain in my spleen. I mean, it was sharp pain. My gallbladder was hurting. My liver was hurting. And I was thinking, oh my God. Oh. I says, I can't take this antibiotic. You say, what? I don't know. All I know is the yeast infection was apparently starting to affect my organs. My heart muscle, I could feel pressure on my heart muscle. I notice whenever my gallbladder gets really inflamed, which I think was happening. You might say, why would that happen? Well, the gallbladder produces bile, right? Okay. The bile was apparently full of this yeast toxin that I'm allergic to. So the gallbladder was getting inflamed. Whenever my gallbladder gets inflamed, my heart, I actually feel my heart. It feels really heavy. So yeah, I'm telling you, man. Anyways, those symptoms, the next day, when the 10th day of antibiotic therapy finished, okay? The next day I felt so much better. I thought, oh, I'm going to live. It was awful. You guys, you don't know what it's like to have a systemic yeast infection, okay? I'm still dealing with it, but now I can laugh. I mean, I was laughing. I was managing to keep my sense of humor, but I'm just letting you know. Oh my God. You say, see, what happened is I developed an allergy to the yeast toxin because I had a systemic yeast infection for like 20 years, okay? So now antibiotics are really rough for me. Like most people, if they get a yeast infection, because they're not allergic to the yeast toxin, they're not going to, it won't be as rough on them. They can just, take Deflucan or Nystatin or whatever and, But for me, I'm dealing with a tremendous amount of inflammation because of allergy, plus the infection from the yeast. So I had a bacterial infection in here, and then it got compounded by a yeast infection in here, lots of swelling. It got so bad the gums were swelling on this side. The good news is I made it through. I'm at the other end. But I just wanted to, I'm going to be kind of sharing some of this in the story I write about the Gail commandments. I probably made it a little bit worse because I had too much kefir. That milk sugar in the kefir was feeding the yeast, okay? And they were getting really, really happy. Yeah. So I probably made it worse by drinking way too much kefir. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to be sharing some of the lessons I learned. But anyways, it is time for me to make a YouTube video. Yesterday was actually the day, but I just wanted to share that I survived. A 10-day course of antibiotics with complications with a pretty nasty yeast infection, which I'm still dealing with. Yeah. It's a miracle that I was able to do the whole 10-day course. Yeah. Honest to God, the last 3 days I felt like how a cancer patient must feel when they're on chemotherapy, man. I was that miserable. It was, yeah. I don't know, most of you out there probably have not had a super yeast infection, okay? So you may think this is crazy, but yeah. Let me just tell you this much. Vladimir Putin's wife, Larissa, she died because of the super yeast. So this, and now I'm not saying what I have is the super yeast, but unfortunately, as a result of having had like a 20-year yeast infection, I do have an allergy to yeast toxin. So when I get a systemic yeast infection, it affects me pretty strongly. Larissa, this was back in 2000. Vladimir was not in my life at that time, and they misdiagnosed her with breast cancer. Okay, this is what a systemic yeast infection can do. The symptoms can be so severe, especially if it's a super yeast, like what she had. She had the same yeast that I had for 20 years. She was getting black heaps on her breast from the yeast, okay? They thought it was cancer. So what did they do? They put her on chemotherapy. Oh my God. That is the absolute worst thing you can do for somebody with an infection, okay? The chemotherapy killed her. Yeah. The infection became so severe. By the time they figured out that it wasn't cancer and that she had a yeast infection, it was too late. They couldn't save her life. She died. Yeah. See, that's part of the problem with yeast, okay? Because things like the Jesuit super yeast are not well known and well documented as ailments. When somebody gets really sick with them, if the patient is misdiagnosed, it's a death sentence, because they're going to use the wrong treatment and they'll kill the patient. And because the super yeast, the Jesuit super yeast, now I'm not sure about the yeast that I have. It might have just been regular Candida, but that Jesuit super yeast ate its own poop. So you couldn't kill it by killing it. You had to flush it out of the body without killing the germ. Because if you killed the germ, the explosion from the dead yeast would act as fertilizer to any remaining yeast. And that's why I had the infection for 20 years. Even after I took stuff like nystatin, diflucan, and all the yeast-killing medicines, it always came back. It would never go away. And that's why I ended up becoming a big natural medicine freak and getting real obsessed with diet. So I'm going to be going into that, into the Gail Commandments stories, why Jesus had to do that. This might be helpful to people who have weird illnesses or illnesses that are not well known. See, Jesus had to give me the Gail Commandments because traditional medicine failed me with the super yeast. Nothing they were doing was working. In fact, some of the stuff they were doing was making it worse. One doctor, a urologist, put me on macrobid, which is an antibiotic. And he lied to me and said it confined itself to the urinary tract. And I was on it for over a year, okay? That was back in 1998. As a result of that, my yeast infection got super duper bad. And I started getting really bad symptoms, very similar to the symptoms that I got as a result of just the 10-day antibiotic. And I was freaking out. I was going to the doctors, and they were treating it all wrong. And I wasn't really a big natural medicine person until the regular doctors started failing me. Unfortunately, I started doing some stuff that wasn't really good. I was getting into natural medicine, taking all these supplements. I had one point, in 2010, I was taking like 20 supplements a day. And that's why Jesus had to give me the Gail Commandments. Because I'd given up on traditional medicine because it wasn't working. I'll be going into that. But basically the Jesuits gave me a yeast infection, which they deliberately kept out of the medical literature. Yeah, the Jesuit super yeast, a genetically engineered super yeast. And I think the reason they did that is because they wanted to kill me with an illness that would make it look like I was crazy. Yeah. Like I said, Vladimir Putin's wife died from this. Jesus saved my life with the Seroquel. The Seroquel was the cure to the super yeast. But unfortunately, as a result of having had that infection for like 20 years, I did develop an allergy to yeast toxin, including Candida yeast toxin. So when I get a yeast infection, it's never a picnic. Yeah. Oh, like I just explained to you. Anyways, the good news is I'm on the other end. But I have noticed that people who have not been infected with a systemic, I mean, to be honest with you, we've all had yeast infections like women vaginitis, where you just use some monostat and it's usually gone in 2 or 3 weeks, or 2 weeks maybe. And some of us may have gotten thrush and we get over it. But when you get one that's systemic and you feel dizzy, nauseated, heartburny, diarrhea, brain fog, and you get all these weird symptoms, what often happens if the medical community is not treating it right is you get treated like you're crazy, like you're psychosomatic. And the worst part of it is you start believing it because nobody seems to be able to help you. Yeah. I'm going to be going into that when I write my story. Yeah, and I think I'll be helping a lot of people. Anyways, the good news is I'm feeling better. You say, what about your husband? My husband is great, okay? He's great. And I love him. He's a great doctor. But I'm going to tell you, though, if you haven't been through a systemic yeast infection, you can really underestimate how uncomfortable it makes the patient. It's because it doesn't have a reputation of being something that nasty. But when the yeast infection gets severe and systemic, I would go so far as to say it can be as uncomfortable as cancer, maybe beginning of a heart attack. And it should be treated with respect. Like a patient who's got a systemic yeast infection should not be fluffed off. Like don't say, oh, you're imagining your symptoms. Don't fluff them off, man. They're suffering. Just believe me, they are. It's nasty. They're suffering. They're in pain. Yeah, it's no fun. I just told you. I've been through childbirth, okay? The last 5 days of the last 5 days of antibiotics was like the first half of my labor. That's how much pain and suffering I was going through. Yeah. And when I tried to relate that to my men, bless their hearts, I don't think they understood how uncomfortable I was. Yeah. Because they haven't been through it. And because yeast doesn't have a reputation for making you that uncomfortable. You think, oh, you're just a little itchy, No. When it gets systemic, okay? When it gets systemic, where your brain feels like a fog and you feel like the vertigo, have you ever had vertigo? Is vertigo fun? I was almost getting vertigo. I thought I was seeing black spots in front of my eyes. Anyways, good news, hallelujah. I'm out of the tunnel and I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel. I survived. And the universe is still here and I'm counting my blessings and I have a wonderful husband. But I wanted to make this video a little educational. I'm feeling a little dizzy right now, but hey, nothing compared to 3 days ago. And I can tell I'm on the mend. And it looks like the area is healing well. It paid off to stick through the whole 10 days of hell on antibiotic therapy. For somebody with my background, like I told you, back in 2009, by the time I was on second day of antibiotic therapy, I said, I quit. I think I'd rather have the sore throat. But I couldn't afford to do that with this because that was a nasty bacterial infection, and I knew if I didn't stick with that 10-day course, I'd have a relapse. God forbid, and I'd have to go back on antibiotics again. Fortunately, I was able to stick through the whole 10 days. Yeah. Anyways, you guys, I owed you all a video. And looks like my husband and I are survivors. Well, having a 10-year dental infection? I'm surprised it didn't kill me. I should have got sepsis a long time ago. I really suspect Jesus did something supernatural. Anyways, he left us in June 2022, and apparently that stopped, and that's why this tooth had to go. So anyways, you guys, I'm saying, hallelujah, I survived 10-day antibiotic torture therapy. I got my tooth out and saved my life.
In a world of secrets where darkness reigns, there's a warrior rising, breaking free from chains. She's Gail Schuler, her heart's pure and strong. With the power of love, she'll right the world's wrongs. Yeah! Fighting against the devil with order. She's the first, a passionate crusader. Stand by the side of conquering.